The darkness of space stretched endlessly in all directions as 6 alien ships moved through the void between star systems. These vessels belonged to the Zephyrian fleet, and they looked nothing like human ships. Each one was long and thin like a crystal knife with smooth surfaces that reflected starlight. The ships moved in perfect formation, as they had done for many years while exploring the galaxy. Fleet Commander Vexithara stood in the center of his flagship watching the displays that showed empty space around them. His 4 arms moved across control panels, while his large eyes studied the readings. The Zephyrians had been traveling for months without finding anything interesting, but today felt different. Something was approaching their position from the direction of a small yellow star. The sensor officer turned toward his commander with excitement in his voice. A single ship was coming their way, and it was unlike anything they had seen before. The vessel was huge and blocky with thick armor, plating covering its entire surface. Strange weapons stuck out from every side like the spines of some dangerous creature. Most alien ships they encountered were either small trading vessels or simple exploration craft, but this looked like it was built for war. Meanwhile, Captain Jake Morrison walked across the bridge of the human warship UES Vengeance. The ship was 2 kilometers long and packed with the most advanced weapons Earth could build. Jake had been in the military for 20 years and had fought in 3 different wars before being given command of this massive vessel. His crew of 800 people represented the best soldiers and officers humanity had to offer. Communications Officer Lisa Park looked up from her station with a worried expression on her face. Strange signals were coming from somewhere ahead, of them on frequencies she had never seen before. The patterns suggested intelligence, but the technology was completely alien. She ran the signals through every translation program in the ship's computer, but nothing worked. Jake walked over to her station and studied the readings. First contact protocols had been drilled into every officer at the academy. They all knew this day might come when humans would meet another intelligent species among the stars. The question was whether these aliens would be friendly or hostile. Jake had learned during his years of military service that it was always better to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. On the alien flagship, Tactical Analyst Kethmon monitored the approaching human vessel with growing curiosity. The ship's design was crude compared to Zephyrian technology, but there was something unsettling about its appearance. Most species they encountered built ships for exploration or trade, but this vessel looked like it was designed to fight and destroy other ships. Heavy armor covered every surface and weapon systems were mounted wherever there was space. Commander Vexithara had encountered dozens of different alien species during his career. Most fell into predictable categories. Some were peaceful traders who wanted to exchange goods and information. Others were aggressive expansionists who tried to claim territory through force. A few were primitive species that had barely learned to travel between planets. This human ship seemed to fit somewhere between the aggressive and primitive categories. The distance between the 2 fleets continued to shrink as both sides tried to figure out what they were dealing with. Jake ordered his weapons officer to keep all systems on standby, but not to power up anything that might be seen as threatening. He wanted to give diplomacy a chance, even though every instinct told him to prepare for battle. Kethmon studied the human ship's design more carefully and noticed details that made him uncomfortable. The vessel had multiple layers of armor that seemed designed to absorb enormous amounts of damage. Weapon systems were placed to provide overlapping fields of fire in every direction. Most disturbing of all, the ship appeared to have backup systems for everything, including multiple bridge sections in case the primary command center was destroyed. Vexithara decided it was time to make contact. He gestured with one of his 4 arms, and the communications officer opened a channel on multiple frequencies. The Zephyrian language was translated into mathematical concepts that any intelligent species should be able to understand. They transmitted basic information about their peaceful intentions and their desire to establish communication. Jake received the alien transmission and called his science officer, Amy Foster, to analyze the signal. She worked quickly to decode. the mathematical patterns and, within minutes, had a basic translation system working. The aliens claimed to be explorers from something called the Zephyrian Collective. They wanted to talk and exchange information about their respective civilizations. The moment had finally arrived. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe. Jake took a deep breath and prepared to make history as the first human to speak with an alien intelligence. He had no way of knowing that this peaceful first contact would soon turn into something much more dangerous. The aliens were about to make a decision that would change everything and reveal just how dangerous humans could be when threatened. Commander Vexathara studied the primitive human vessel with the confidence that came from centuries of technological superiority. The Zephyrian Collective had expanded across 17 star systems without encountering any serious resistance. Their weapons could destroy planets, and their shields could stop almost any attack. This blocky human ship looked impressive, but it was clearly built by a species that had not yet mastered the advanced sciences. Kethmon looked up from his tactical station with anticipation in his voice. He requested permission to conduct a standard scanning protocol on the human vessel. The advanced Zephyrian sensors could map any ship down to the smallest detail within moments. They would learn everything about human technology and determine whether these aliens posed any threat to the collective. The commander gave his approval with a casual wave of one arm. This was standard procedure when encountering new species. The scan would reveal the ship's weapons capabilities, defensive systems, and technological level. Most primitive species had simple nuclear reactors and basic projectile weapons. A few had developed energy weapons or primitive shield technology. None had ever surprised the Zephyrians with anything truly advanced. The scanning beam reached out from the Zephyrian flagship like an invisible finger probing deep into the human ship's structure. The beam could pass through any known type of armor and map internal systems without the target even knowing they were being scanned. It was one of the collective's most useful technologies for gathering intelligence about potential enemies or allies. On the bridge of the Vengeance Captain, Jake Morrison continued trying to establish meaningful communication with the aliens. Communications officer Lisa Park had managed to create a basic translation system, but the conversations were limited to simple concepts. The aliens seemed curious about human civilization and asked questions about Earth's location and population. Chief Engineer Danny Clark emerged from a maintenance shaft, wiping grease from his hands with a satisfied expression. The ship's new fusion reactors were running perfectly after months of testing and refinement. Each reactor could power a small city, and the Vengeance had 6 of them working together. The massive energy output was needed to run all the ship's systems, including the weapons that could destroy entire enemy fleets. Science Officer Amy Foster noticed something unusual on her displays. Some kind of scanning beam was hitting their ship from the alien vessel. The beam was incredibly sophisticated and more advanced than anything in Earth's databases. She reported this to Captain Morrison and asked if she should raise the defensive shields. Jake considered the situation carefully before telling her to keep the shields down, but to monitor the scan closely. The Zephyrian scanning beam continued its work mapping every detail of the human ship's construction. What Kethmon discovered in those first few minutes would change everything he thought he knew about primitive species. The human vessel was not just big, it was built like a fortress that could move between the stars. Layer upon layer of armor protected the ship's vital systems, and each layer was made from different materials that would stop different types of weapons. Kethmon's mandibles clicked nervously as he studied the scan results. The humans had not just built a warship, they had built something designed to fight multiple enemies at the same time while taking massive damage. The ship had over 300 separate weapon systems mounted on every available surface. Each weapon was designed to work independently so that destroying some of them would not stop the others from fighting. The medical facilities on the human ship were unlike anything the Zephyrians had ever seen. Most species built small medical bays to treat minor injuries during space travel. The humans had created what looked like an entire hospital designed to handle hundreds of casualties during battle. Operating rooms were shielded against weapon fire and equipped to function even if the ship was taking heavy damage. Commander Vexus Thera felt his confidence beginning to waver as more scan results came in. The human ship had backup systems for everything, including multiple bridge sections, redundant life support, and emergency repair facilities. This was not the design philosophy of a species that fought occasional border skirmishes. This looked like the work of a civilization that expected to face extinction and had decided to build ships that could survive anything. Engineering Officer Nix Odell reported from his station with alarm in his voice. The human ship's power systems were incredible. 6 fusion reactors worked together to produce more energy than some space stations. The power distribution network was designed to reroute around damaged sections automatically so that losing part of the ship would not shut down the weapons or shields. The weapons themselves were a mixture of technologies that showed centuries of military development. Railguns could fire projectiles at enormous speeds using magnetic acceleration. Missile systems carried hundreds of different warheads, including some that used exotic matter the Zephyrians barely understood. Point defense networks could track and destroy thousands of incoming targets simultaneously. Kethmon transmitted his preliminary findings to the other ships in the fleet. The silence that followed was profound as each captain realized what they were looking at. This was not an exploration vessel or even a simple warship. The humans had built a mobile siege platform designed to fight enemies with superior technology and win through sheer determination and firepower. Science Officer Zix Ara studied the tactical implications of the scan results. The human ship's design suggested they had fought wars across multiple star systems against enemies who wanted to destroy them completely. Every system was built with redundancy, and every weapon was positioned to maximize damage against multiple targets. Most disturbing of all, the ship showed signs of having been in actual combat with burn marks and repaired sections visible throughout the hull. Commander Vexathara began to understand that the collective had encountered something completely unexpected. The humans were not just another primitive species to be conquered or recruited. They were survivors of wars that had taught them to build ships like this one. The question was, what kind of enemies had forced them to become so dangerous, and whether those enemies were still out there somewhere in the galaxy waiting. The scanning beam continued to probe deeper into the human warship, revealing layer after layer of military doctrine embedded in every design choice. Kethmon felt a growing sense of dread as he studied the results. The humans had not just built weapons and armor, they had created an entire philosophy of warfare that assumed the worst possible circumstances and planned for survival against overwhelming odds. Navigation Officer Zixara examined the ship's thruster arrangements with increasing alarm. The massive engines were positioned to allow combat maneuvers in asteroid fields, planetary atmospheres, and even the corona of stars. This suggested the humans fought battles in environments that would destroy most vessels. The thruster design also included backup systems and redundant fuel lines, so the ship could continue maneuvering even after taking severe damage to its propulsion systems. Commander Vexathera called for a detailed analysis of the human vessel's internal structure. What he learned made his blood run cold. The ship was divided into hundreds of separate compartments that could be sealed off independently. If enemy weapons breached the hull in one section, the rest of the ship would continue fighting. Emergency bulkheads could contain explosions, fires, or even complete atmosphere loss without affecting other areas. The damage control systems were beyond anything the Zephyrians had imagined. Repair teams were stationed throughout the vessel with equipment to fix almost any type of damage during combat. Automated systems could seal hull breaches, reroute power around damaged sections, and even manufacture replacement parts while the battle continued. The humans had clearly learned to keep fighting no matter how much punishment their ships took. Captain Jake Morrison reviewed the tactical display showing the alien fleet maintaining their cautious distance. Something about their formation seemed different now, almost as if they were having second thoughts about this encounter. Communications Officer Lisa Park reported that the alien scanning beam had intensified and was now probing every system on the ship. Jake wondered what they were finding that required such detailed examination. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Kate Sullivan worked in the ship's medical facilities, preparing for whatever might happen next. The medical bay was designed like a battlefield. Hospital with trauma centers that could operate during the worst possible conditions. Surgical suites were shielded against weapon fire and equipped with backup power systems. The facility could handle hundreds of casualties, while the ship continued fighting because human military doctrine assumed that crew members would be wounded and needed to return to duty as quickly as possible. Weapons Officer Maria Rodriguez monitored the ship's combat systems from her station. Each railgun could fire projectiles at speeds that would punch through planetary crust. The magnetic acceleration systems drew enormous amounts of power but could maintain continuous fire for hours. Missile systems contained thousands of warheads with different purposes, including armor penetration, area denial, and electronic warfare. Point defense networks used rapid-fire lasers and projectile weapons to create an impenetrable barrier around the ship. The alien scanning revealed something that terrified the Zephyrians more than any weapon system. The humans had built their ship expecting to fight alone against multiple enemies. The Combat Information Center could track hundreds of targets simultaneously while coordinating defensive and offensive operations. Fire control systems were designed to engage different types of enemies with the most effective weapons while ensuring that friendly fire incidents were impossible. Kethmon studied the ship's crew quarters and found evidence of military discipline that went far beyond normal space exploration. Personal gear included combat equipment, emergency medical supplies, and backup communication devices. Even civilian crew members like cooks and maintenance workers had combat training and assigned battle stations. The entire ship's company was prepared to fight and die to protect their vessel and complete their mission. The most disturbing discovery was the ship's computer systems. Multiple artificial intelligence programs managed different aspects of combat operations, including target identification, threat assessment, and tactical planning. If the human crew was killed or incapacitated, the ship could continue fighting on its own using predetermined battle plans. The computers contained detailed information about known enemy tactics and countermeasures for different types of attacks. Engineering sections revealed the true scope of human military engineering. Fabrication facilities could produce ammunition, spare parts, and even small weapons during extended operations. The ship carried enough raw materials to manufacture whatever was needed for months of continuous combat. Multiple workshops allowed crew members to modify equipment and develop new tactics based on battlefield experience. Commander Vexithara realized that the collective had encountered something unprecedented. Most species built ships for specific purposes like exploration, trade, or conquest. The humans had built a vessel that could serve as a mobile base for extended military operations far from any support. Every system was designed with the assumption that help would not be coming, and the ship would have to survive on its own. Science Officer Nix Odell reported his analysis of the human ship's defensive systems. Multiple shield generators protected different sections of the vessel using overlapping energy fields that could absorb or deflect various types of weapons. If some generators were destroyed, the remaining units could still provide partial protection. The armor itself was composed of materials that would stop kinetic weapons, energy beams, and exotic radiation attacks. The tactical implications were staggering. The humans had built this ship because they expected to fight enemies with superior technology and greater numbers. They had learned to compensate for technological disadvantages through superior tactics, better training, and sheer determination to survive. The ship represented centuries of military evolution driven by the need to win against overwhelming odds. Fleet Captain Velthar transmitted a private message to Commander Vex Thara expressing his growing concerns about the situation. The human vessel was not just a warship, it was evidence of a species that had survived challenges that would have destroyed most civilizations. The question was whether the collective wanted to test themselves against enemies who had learned to turn warfare into a science and who never gave up no matter how hopeless the situation appeared. Fleet Commander Vexithara called an emergency conference with all ship captains as the scanning results revealed more disturbing details about the human vessel. Holographic images of his commanders flickered to life around the command chamber, creating a circle of worried alien faces. Each captain had received copies of the tactical analysis, and none of them liked what they were seeing. Captain Nix O'Tall of the science vessel Harmonic spoke first with fear evident in her voice. The scans confirmed their worst suspicions about the human warship. This was not just a military vessel, it was a mobile siege platform designed to fight multiple opponents simultaneously while absorbing catastrophic damage. The medical facilities alone suggested the humans expected crew casualties in the hundreds and planned to keep fighting despite terrible losses. Captain Velthar of the destroyer Swift Current added his own observations about the tactical implications. A species that builds vessels like this does not do so for exploration or peaceful contact. They build them because they have learned to fight enemies who are trying to completely destroy them. The level of redundancy and defensive systems suggested the humans had faced extinction and chose to develop the means to fight back against overwhelming odds. Meanwhile, on the bridge of the Vengeance Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Kate Sullivan continued her preparations in the ship's extensive medical facilities. The trauma bays were equipped to handle the worst imaginable injuries that could occur during space combat. Emergency surgical suites could operate even if the ship was under attack and losing atmosphere. The humans had learned through bitter experience that keeping wounded crew members alive and functional was essential for survival during extended battles. Lieutenant Commander Chris Parker monitored the weapons systems from his station, reporting that all systems showed ready status across the board. Each railgun could fire projectiles at significant fractions of light speed with enough kinetic energy to crack asteroids. The missile systems carried warheads ranging from conventional explosives to exotic matter weapons that could disrupt the molecular structure of enemy armor. Point defense systems could track and eliminate thousands of incoming threats simultaneously, using automated targeting that never tired or made mistakes. But the weapons themselves were not what truly terrified the Zephyrian observers. It was what the weapons implied about human nature and military philosophy. This was clearly a species that had faced annihilation and decided to fight rather than surrender. They had turned warfare into an exact science not from natural aggression, but from the necessity of survival against enemies who showed no mercy. Commander Vexithara studied reports from his intelligence officers about the human ship's construction methods. The vessel showed evidence of being built in sections with each part designed to function independently if necessary. This modular approach meant that losing large portions of the ship would not necessarily stop it from completing its mission. The humans had learned to build vessels that could continue fighting even after sustaining damage that would destroy most other ships. The engineering reports were equally disturbing. Chief Engineer Danny Clark moved through sections of the ship that contained fabrication facilities capable of producing almost anything the crew might need during extended operations. Raw material storage areas held enough resources to manufacture weapons, ammunition, spare parts, and even food for months of independent operation. The humans had built their ship to fight far from any support with no expectation of rescue or reinforcement. Weapons specialist Maria Rodriguez reviewed tactical procedures with her staff, ensuring that every system was properly calibrated and ready for immediate use. The ship's combat doctrine assumed that any encounter with unknown aliens might turn hostile without warning. Every crew member had specific duties during battle and backup assignments in case their primary position was destroyed or they were killed or wounded. The Zephyrian fleet commanders exchanged worried glances as they considered the implications of what they had discovered. Most species they encountered fell into predictable categories that could be managed through standard diplomatic or military procedures. Peaceful traders could be negotiated with for mutual benefit. Aggressive expansionists could be defeated through superior technology and tactics. Primitive civilizations could be conquered or recruited as vassals. But the humans represented something entirely different and far more dangerous. They appeared to be apex predators who had survived by learning to fight and defeat other apex predators. Their ship was not designed for conquest or exploration, but for survival against enemies who possessed superior technology and greater numbers. Every system and procedure showed evidence of lessons learned through actual combat against determined opponents. Captain Nix Odell transmitted additional analysis showing that the human vessel's design incorporated elements from multiple different technological approaches. This suggested they had encountered and defeated several different enemy species, each with unique advantages and capabilities. The humans had apparently studied their opponent's strengths and developed countermeasures while incorporating the best enemy technologies into their own designs. Science Officer Amy Foster continued monitoring the alien scanning beam while running her own passive sensors to gather information about the Zephyrian fleet. The alien vessels were clearly more advanced than anything Earth had developed, but their formation and behavior suggested caution rather than confidence. This was unusual for a technologically superior force making first contact with a primitive species. The tactical situation was becoming clearer to both sides. The Zephyrians had expected to encounter another species that would either submit to their authority or be easily defeated through technological superiority. Instead, they had found evidence of a civilization that had learned to fight and win against opponents with every possible advantage. The humans had turned desperation into determination, and desperation into a philosophy of warfare that assumed no quarter would be given or asked. Commander Vexathara realized that the collective faced a choice that would determine the future of both civilizations. They could attempt to establish peaceful relations with a species that clearly possessed the capability and willingness to fight to the death if threatened, or they could try to eliminate what appeared to be a potential threat before the humans developed technology equal to their own. Either choice carried enormous risks that could reshape the balance of power in this region of the galaxy. Commander Vexathara made his decision based on centuries of Zephyrian military doctrine and the assumption that technological superiority would always prevail over primitive determination. The collective had built its empire through calculated displays of overwhelming force followed by demands for submission. Species that refused to acknowledge Zephyrian dominance were eliminated as obstacles to galactic order and progress. The human ship was impressive for a primitive vessel, but it was clearly outmatched by advanced Zephyrian technology. Their weapons could destroy planets, and their shields could stop almost any known form of attack. A single demonstration of superior firepower would surely convince the humans to surrender and accept vassal status within the collective. This had worked with dozens of other species, and there was no reason to expect different results from these particular aliens. Vexathara activated the fleet communication system and transmitted orders to all vessel commanders. They would demonstrate Zephyrian superiority with a warning shot that would pass close enough to the human ship to show the power of their weapons without actually destroying the vessel. The humans would recognize their hopeless situation and surrender rather than face complete annihilation. The lead Zephyrian vessel began powering up its primary weapon system. The focused energy beam could vaporize asteroids and had been used to crack the crust of entire planets during previous conquests. A shot fired across the bow of the human ship would demonstrate power beyond anything in the primitive aliens' experience and force them to acknowledge Zephyrian dominance. On the Bridge of the Vengeance, Captain Jake Morrison continued his attempts to establish meaningful diplomatic contact with the alien fleet. The translation systems were improving, but communication remained limited to basic concepts and simple questions. The aliens seemed interested in learning about human civilization, but their questions had a calculating quality that made Jake uncomfortable. Communications. Officer Lisa Park monitored all frequencies for additional signals from the alien vessels. Something in their transmission patterns had changed over the last few minutes, suggesting increased activity and coordination between ships. The aliens were clearly making some kind of decision about how to proceed with this first contact situation. The Zephyrian energy beam lanced out across space like a spear of pure destruction. It passed just ahead of the Vengeance's bow, close enough that the ship's sensors registered the incredible energy levels involved. The beam continued on into empty space where it dissipated harmlessly, but its message was unmistakable. The aliens possessed weapons of devastating power and were willing to use them. Alarms began sounding throughout the human warship as defensive systems automatically detected the energy discharge and classified it as a hostile act. Warning lights flashed on every bridge station while computer systems analyzed the beam's characteristics and calculated its destructive potential. The results showed that a direct hit from such a weapon would penetrate even the Vengeance's heavy armor and cause massive internal damage. Lieutenant Park turned from her communication station with shock and anger in her voice. The aliens had fired on them without warning or provocation. The shot had missed but barely and represented a clear threat to the ship and crew. She requested permission to transmit a response, demanding an explanation for this aggressive action. Captain Morrison felt decades of military training take control of his thoughts and reactions. The situation had changed from peaceful first contact to potential combat in a matter of seconds. His primary responsibility was the safety of his crew and the defense of human interests. The aliens had made the first hostile move, and he was authorized to respond with whatever force was necessary to protect his ship. Jake activated the general quarters alarm that sent every crew member to their assigned battle stations. Throughout the ship, 800 highly trained military personnel began the practiced routine of preparing for combat. Weapons systems came online with lethal precision, while defensive screens powered up to maximum strength. The Vengeance transformed from an exploration vessel into an instrument of war. Chief Engineer Danny Clark initiated emergency power protocols that brought all 6 fusion reactors to full output. The massive energy flow activated every system the ship possessed, including weapons that had never been fired in actual combat. Backup generators came online automatically, while damage control teams took their positions throughout the vessel. The ship was ready for whatever the aliens might throw at them. Weapons Officer Maria Rodriguez began the targeting sequence that would lock the ship's railguns and missile systems onto the alien vessels. Fire control computers calculated range, speed, and defensive capabilities while selecting the most effective ammunition types for each target. The humans had built their weapons to penetrate any known type of defensive technology through sheer kinetic force and overwhelming firepower. Dr. Kate Sullivan activated the medical bay's emergency protocols, preparing trauma centers for incoming casualties. Surgical teams took their positions while automated systems began producing blood substitutes and emergency medications. The medical staff had trained for this situation, but hoped they would never have to use their skills in actual combat. Commander Vexathara could not believe what his sensors were showing him. The primitive human vessel was powering up every weapon and defensive system it possessed in response to what had been intended as a simple demonstration of superior technology. No species had ever responded to a warning shot with full combat deployment. The logical response was surrender, or at least a request for negotiations. Tactical analyst Kethmon reported with growing alarm that the human ship's energy output had increased by several 100% in just minutes. Heat signatures indicated that weapon systems throughout the vessel were coming online simultaneously. The humans were not preparing for surrender, they were preparing for war against odds that should have convinced any rational species to submit immediately. The Zephyrians had made a fundamental error in judgment. They had assumed that the humans would react like other species they had encountered and recognize the futility of resistance against superior technology. Instead, they had triggered every survival instinct that had allowed humanity to fight its way from a single planet to the stars. The humans were not going to surrender because surrender meant death and they had learned long ago that it was better to die fighting than to die helplessly. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the center of the Vengeance's bridge as his ship completed its transformation from a diplomatic vessel into an instrument of destruction. Every system was operating at maximum efficiency, while 800 crew members waited for orders that would determine whether humanity's first contact with alien intelligence would end in peace or war. The communication system crackled to life as Jake opened a channel to the alien fleet. His voice carried the weight of military authority earned through years of command and the absolute certainty that came from superior training and preparation. The aliens had fired first, and now they would face the consequences of threatening a human warship and its crew. Jake's message was simple and direct. The alien vessels had committed an act of war by firing on a ship of the United Earth Forces. They would immediately power down their weapons and prepare to be boarded for questioning, or they would be considered hostile combatants and destroyed without further warning. There would be no negotiation and no second chances. Commander Vex Ithara received the human transmission with disbelief and growing fear. A single primitive vessel was threatening his entire fleet, despite being vastly outnumbered and outgunned. The human captain seemed completely confident in his ability to carry out his threats, even though any rational analysis showed the situation was hopeless for the smaller force. Vexthera activated his own communication system and transmitted what he believed would be the final warning these stubborn aliens would receive. The humans were facing 6 advanced warships with technology far beyond anything their primitive civilization could comprehend. Surrender was their only option if they wanted their species to survive what would surely follow. The response from Captain Morrison was not words, but action. The human warship opened fire with a devastating barrage that demonstrated exactly what centuries of military evolution had produced. Railguns fired streams of projectiles that moved at speeds no known shield technology could completely stop. Each projectile carried enough kinetic energy to punch through planetary crust, and the Vengeance was firing hundreds of them every second. The first Zephyrian vessel died in moments as human railgun rounds overwhelmed its advanced shields through sheer brutal force. The aliens had built their defenses to stop energy weapons and exotic matter attacks, but nothing in their experience had prepared them for simple kinetic projectiles fired at relativistic speeds. The ship's hull cracked like an eggshell before secondary explosions tore it apart completely. Missile systems added their own contribution to the destruction as thousands of warheads spread across space like a deadly cloud. Each missile contained guidance systems that could track and pursue individual targets while coordinating with other missiles to ensure maximum damage. The humans had learned to saturate enemy defenses with more projectiles than any point defense system could possibly handle. The second Zephyrian vessel attempted to maneuver away from the destruction, but human targeting systems had been designed to track and eliminate fast-moving threats in three-dimensional space. Lieutenant Commander Chris Parker coordinated the weapons fire with computer-assisted precision that guaranteed hits against any target within range. The alien ship lasted slightly longer than the first, but the result was the same. Ensign Bobby Turner monitored the tactical display from his communications station, reporting the destruction of enemy vessels with professional calm. 2 alien ships had been eliminated while the remaining 4 were attempting to withdraw from engagement range. Their advanced technology was useless against weapons designed to overwhelm any defense through superior firepower and tactical coordination. Chief Rodriguez looked up from her weapons console, asking for permission to pursue the fleeing aliens and complete their destruction. Every instinct trained into human military personnel demanded the elimination of threats before they could regroup and return with reinforcements. The enemy had fired first and deserved no mercy or opportunity for revenge. Captain Morrison considered the tactical situation carefully. The aliens had initiated hostilities and threatened his ship, but pursuing them might escalate the conflict beyond this single encounter. Earth Command needed to know about this first contact and prepare for possible retaliation. However, the demonstration of human military capability had been unmistakably clear. Jake transmitted new orders throughout his ship. Weapons systems would remain active and ready, but the pursuit was canceled. The surviving alien vessels would be allowed to withdraw and report what they had learned about human capabilities. Sometimes the best victory was letting enemies escape to spread word about the consequences of threatening humanity. The surviving Zephyrian ships fled toward the edge of the star system, while their commanders tried to comprehend what had just happened. 2 advanced warships had been destroyed by a single primitive vessel using weapons that seemed crude but were devastatingly effective. The humans had not relied on superior technology, but on superior tactics, training, and an absolute refusal to surrender. Fleet Commander Vexathara understood the terrible truth as his damaged fleet limped away from the battlefield. The humans had not built their warship to explore the galaxy or conquer other species. They had built it because they had learned that the universe was full of predators, and the only way to survive was to become an even more dangerous predator. Thus, Scan had revealed more than just human technology and military capability. It had revealed human nature itself. These were not prey animals that could be intimidated into submission. They were apex predators who had earned their place among the stars by fighting and defeating every enemy that had tried to destroy them. Their ship was not just a weapon, it was proof that they had survived challenges that would have ended most civilizations. Communications Officer Lisa Park transmitted a detailed report of the engagement to Earth Command, while Dr. Kate Sullivan stood down from emergency medical protocols. Remarkably, the human ship had taken no casualties during the brief but decisive battle. Superior defensive systems and tactical planning had protected the crew, while offensive capabilities eliminated the threat. The Zephyrian Collective would add a new entry to their galactic database within hours of the surviving ship's return. The entry would be marked with the highest possible threat classification and distributed to every vessel in their fleet. It would read simply, "Humans, avoid all contact. Apex predator species, extremely dangerous. Do not engage under any circumstances." The Waikiki grave mistake had not been underestimating human technology or weapons. The real mistake was underestimating human determination to survive and the lengths to which humanity would go to protect itself from any threat. The aliens had learned too late that some species earned their freedom through strength and kept it through the willingness to fight anyone who tried to take it away.